Sufficiently Advanced Magic by Andrew Bro. This book was a lot of fun. I have a lot to say, surprisingly, about this thick fantasy boy right here, but let's just start off with a couple points I want to hit on, just right off the bat. I don't know why, I kind of just went in with low expectations here. I can't justify that. Like, there was just a thing in my head where I was like, this will be a fine fantasy book. No, this is not just a fine fantasy book. This is one of the best self-published fantasy books I have read. It deserves almost all of the praise I have seen it get. And this next thing I'm about to say is not something I say about every book I read. I'm not just hoeing out this praise specifically, but Sufficiently Advanced Magic is a story that knows exactly what it is, and it's told in the best way possible, in my opinion, to communicate exactly what the author was going for. Andrew Rowe is clearly a massive fantasy fan who understands what makes specific fantasy stories work, and I enjoyed that element to this massively. It's also just so much fun, and after quite a few recent darker reads, that was just a nice refreshing taste. I often get asked though when I give that praise of like, hey, this author clearly loves fantasy, people say like, how can you tell that? I don't understand how you can read Sufficiently Advanced Magic and not tell the author is a big old fantasy nerd. Hey, what's up, me too. Part of that is him just playing to the strengths of the genre to enhance his overall story. He's aware what we as fans generally like, and he ties that into core elements of what moves this book forward. And I cannot stress enough how much this book, this narrative, is motivated by magic in a way that is very fresh. I've seen it before, but it's just so well done here. It just felt like a veteran exercise instead of a self-published book from an author who I'm not really aware of making much before this. I need to research. Did he? Let's put it on screen right now. There's your answer. And aside from that, there were many other technical elements to this book I did enjoy that impressed me for a self-published work. Not even just for self-published, for a fantasy book. It clipped along at a great pace, it was enjoyably written, and it had a wonderful flow. It never felt choppy at all. Now, this is not grimdark at all. In fact, I would say there are some elements to this story that almost hit me as like bordering in YA in their presentation, but I would say this is accessible to almost all age ranges. It just has a rock solid core and structure, and honestly, if you as an author are able to nail those parts of your book, you really have a downhill battle. Like, it's gonna be easy from there because you have such good work to build off of. Now, there are some criticisms I could see this book getting, but I did enjoy one element to it that I think could bug some. It essentially is a gear shifter, which means there are points in this book where, okay, you're going along a certain path and then you're just going to flip and be in a very different feeling setting. For example, this book starts off with our main protagonist, Corin, going off into a dark tower filled with traps and puzzles to find out what happened to his brother who disappeared years ago. Not long after that though, we're in a magic school where the bulk of this story takes place and grows from. And it's a little jarring to just go, whoop, nope, we're over here, but I actually loved how that specific choice was used to build this character, introduce us to the magic, the stakes, how this author is going to tell a story. It was like having a little mini preview of his style, his introduction, his world, before we got thrown into the deep end. But if you're someone who's like, that sounds a bit jarring, I could see how it might turn you off. And that opening segment though really felt like reading an incredible novelization of a dungeon crawler. Like it plays out like you think that would go. I've seen some people say this is borderline lit RPG. I'm not well versed enough in lit RPG to really speak on that matter, but I absolutely see what they could be saying in terms of how it reads. Something else that's kind of interesting, this book is so thoroughly, definitely fantasy with enough tropes laced within to feel familiar with the fantasy genre, but it does avoid some of the most tropey of the tropes and has a protagonist I really found compelling enough as a magic user, as someone who's learning and immersed in this world, that overall I was just pleased with him as a vehicle to experience what is unfolding through the pages. So good praise for him there. He's not one of my favorite characters ever, but Corin does feel right for the story we experience, and expanding that out to the larger cast, all of them are pretty great. There was some characters that could, I think, be reduced or cut entirely, but in terms of who's in the page, all filled with personality, all motivated clearly, and have their own agencies. And in terms of how these characters are developed and explored, the author had a really nice balance of continuing to maintain both at the same time. I feel like too often authors are kind of just flipping back and forth between like, this is a development sequence and this is a exploration sequence. And if you read enough fantasy books, you'll spot a lot of the same here, where it's like, this is who this character is seen versus who they're turning into seen. When that's not really real, that's not how the world works. It's kind of always like a both. And it felt more that way in Sufficiently Advanced Magic, where you're almost using their development to explore who they were and who they could become all at once, which is something I only really see the really top tier of the genre do. So that's actually maybe the strongest element to Sufficiently Advanced Magic. I really enjoyed character exploration and development. But there are some weak spots. The prose as a whole, there's not much I can say aside from they're slightly better than average, but by no means am I getting blown out of the water, and the dialogue specifically descended into cringy at times and was clunky often. So concluding thoughts, Sufficiently Advanced Magic is not going to reinvent the genre. It's not entirely new or something that's just blowing my mind as an experienced fantasy reader, but it's well done and it knows exactly what it is, and it's a lot of fun. And that checks really most of the required enjoyable reads boxes people are going to come across. I understand why this is getting such incredible praise. I think the author is someone who I absolutely need to keep on my radar and keep track of what they're doing in the future, and I'm excited to see what more of my audience thinks of this guy right here. Now we have to transition into Light of the Jedi, the new Star Wars novel that has been quite hyped by fans for a couple reasons. One, this is just something that Disney seems to be pushing out as a rather important book for the new direction Star Wars is going to be going for the next era. And two, it's introducing the High Republic in a bigger, bolder way than Disney has before. From my understanding, there have been canonical High Republic, Old Republic things from Disney, but this is the first like big, huge book that's going to have implications for the wider setup. They're going to take the direction for this. I've not been as vested in this new Star Wars since they decanonized everything, so if any of that's wrong, I do apologize. Correct me in the comments down below. But I was rather pleased by this book overall. I'm going to be honest, I had no expectations going in. Like, I really did not expect to enjoy this new Star Wars book much at all. But what I got was a pretty good story that sets up an engaging world that I see quite a bit of potential for these Star Wars books to breach out into. Now I'm going to split this review into two parts, my very shallow spoiler-free thoughts on the book at the beginning, and then some more wider complaints and why I think those complaints are there, and some contextual things that may have also prevented me from liking the book as much. That way you can be fully informed on how I am, quite frankly, tainted against Star Wars in some ways for various reasons, but let's go ahead and just get into the book first. It had a problem at the beginning where there was way too many characters introduced too fast, and it wasn't until the book focused down on the core, actual important people that I really became invested at all. I'm a character reader, and yeah, that was a big hurdle for me to overcome personally. So once that was cleared up, yeah, but if you're someone who needs to hook onto characters right away, you're probably gonna have the same issue I did. Now, the story itself, once it really got into, building this world and setting the factions at play, I found myself really enjoying what was going on in the narrative context. It took a minute to do so. I really think this could have used some polish structurally in terms of how it brings into the reader and sets you walking down this path, but hey, it's Star Wars. It's going to suffer from problems like that, especially with a new whole era they're trying to bring a crowd into. I'm sure there's some people who are already fully informed on what's going on for this, but you have to understand the general audience is probably going into this new era of Star Wars from this book because Disney's pushing it so hard as this entry point. So I can see that being some people's problem. And I mean, what can I say about tone? It's exactly what you expect tonally from a Star Wars book. And I actually found that to be like something I ended up not liking as much because I found the authorial voice, the flair there I often do look for and have a personal taste in seeking out, to just be neutered. Like, I enjoy a Joe Abercrombie book or an Evan Winter book because how much I can tell they're written by that author, how much I feel their voice coming through and their personality and their little quirks. No, you don't really get that in a Star Wars book, and I think that's just actually part of the formula. They know a lot of different authors need to write into this world, and they can't have 1,000 different voices screaming at you, you know, what's gonna feel right for Star Wars. So it's kind of almost like the MCU thing where, yeah, you can have some fun with it as a director, but you actually have to still make it look like a Marvel movie that like tonally fits. Same thing here. And so I had some problems, but I get and can accept why that has to be the way it is. The pacing was probably one of the strongest elements to this story. I think most people are gonna find this insanely readable because it just clips right along and it just kind of plows through what it needs to at the beginning to set up what I assume is trying to set up other books will pick up and characters that will be followed elsewhere, and then gets into the story that is actually relevant to the story this book is trying to tell. And so as you can kind of tell though, there's some inherent issues and baggage when writing for Star Wars. And this is not objectively true, this is just my interpretation of this book, so we're going to get into that territory in this review, that second part. Yeah, the author voice was diluted, but I also feel like there's not as much baggage as writing a Star Wars book here as it would be writing in like the current era of the movies, but there was still some. And I feel like this author was probably tasked with, you need to introduce these 10 characters, they're not really relevant to your story, but they're going to be in other books, so find a way to include them. It just felt like that to me. Gosh, did I not like that. And this definitely did benefit from being something that's now back in the High Republic, as they're calling it, and it's not in any way, shape, or form held down by what Disney has done in this latest trilogy of Star Wars movies. So there's more freedom in that sense, and you could feel it. I feel like this book would have been so much more constrained if it had to worry about the Skywalker legacy or what have you, where you can't do huge monumental shifting moments in a book when you have to care about what's going on in the movies. So while I'm sure there are things that are held back from the story, it did feel more free than what I was expecting. And I think that's actually largely where my enjoyment came from, because this just felt like a solid Star Wars story and not held down constantly by like a cheap fisted in Darth Vader cameo, or, you know, it just actually was like, oh, we're setting the stage for this new era. How are the Jedi feeling right now? And that was kind of the stuff I enjoyed the most, where it's actually kind of the world exploring. And I'm more than ever optimistic that Disney is going to do something that has a different flavor to it when they bring the High Republic era into TV shows and potentially movies. That's great. I feel like the book definitely did its job for me as a fan in that sense, where I'm now like, all right, I'm here for this time of Star Wars. Let's give Disney a refresh and see what they can do. And then finally, I always was just thinking, is the author even going to get paid for this? Because of all the Disney must pay stuff I just covered here on the channel. Like, I am genuinely just kind of tainted against Disney products at the moment. They just kind of bother me. And so seeing this Star Wars book come in, I do want to praise. The story itself is good enough. There are problems. There are going to be pitfalls because of the baggage that's probably tied onto the author as well. But I am also just kind of like, towards any product that comes from this company. And I just want to be fully transparent and say that that's there, because I do think, in terms of my overall review, I was able to put that aside, but I'm not going to be super pumped and excited to get to this book as I would some others, because I just have a bad taste in my mouth. And I do want to say, without getting into spoilers, this book ended well, and it gave me characters I care enough about that I want to see how they're going to continually be explored in this new Disney universe. So I do disagree with a lot of the reviews I'm seeing online that this is like 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10 book. I'm not in that ballpark, but it's a stronger outing than I thought I would get from Star Wars, for sure. And a lot of my complaints are just things that I have to accept are an inevitable result of the formula these books are being put out in. But yes, overall, I'm more impressed than I thought I would be. It's not a 5 out of 5, it's not a 10 out of 10. I think a Star Wars book absolutely could reach there. I just wasn't feeling it for this one. I get why some people would say that, especially if you're a huge Star Wars fan. I feel like this one is going to be something a lot of people have been looking for a long time. So I'm thrilled for those fans. I really think this will scratch an itch they've been craving for quite literally like a decade at this point, since Disney really took over and decanonized all that stuff. So I'm very, very excited for those fans. But for me, overall, I'm feeling a solid 6.5 out of 10. It's above average. It was enjoyable. It just doesn't push the bar or do anything for me on a level where I'm blown out of the water. But that is my review of Light of the Jedi, the new High Republic book from Disney or Star Wars. And I'm probably going to pick up another one of these books from them because it did its job well enough that I am invested. So that's my overall review. And like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. Have a good one, y'all. Peace!